Okay, I guess I can start now. Welcome to another session of African Debates, and we are here with the Secular Hangout and also Allan Muchiri, and we are discussing an interesting topic that is rarely discussed, and so we are trying to discuss about what whether like the genesis of Christianity or naturalism, like whether it's Western or it's something else. Huh? And so the idea is there's always, if you are used to social media, there's always this discussion about whether Africans are being, imbibing Western ideas instead of sticking to their own. And so there's this idea of is Christianity a Western religion or is atheism a Western religion? And there's also this idea of does it even really matter, or we are just discussing something that doesn't even really matter to us because there are probably other more important things to be concerned about. So the two able debaters are going to carry us through these discussions today to see how much the question actually really matters, whether it's Western or not. And then also there's the idea of what African traditional religion, if they're actually Western, then as Africans, since we're all Africans here, should we just abandon all these Western ideas for African traditional religion? And if not, why not? So that's pretty much what we are discussing today. So we are starting with, as we usually do, a 15-minute opening statement. And we will start with Allan Muchiri, and he will tell us more about himself and also just start on the discussion from the Christian perspective on whether Christianity is a Western religion or it's naturalism that's a Western religion, whether we should be concerned about it, and whether we should be considering African traditional religion. So, Allan, you can just start with sharing a presentation, and you can start now. 15 minutes. So you can unmute, I think.
There we are. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Sorry about that. Before I share my screen, allow me to just introduce myself. My name is Allan Muchiri. I am a Christian. I have for a long time, over 10 years, been a pastor, and I'm also a student and teacher of church history. So yeah, that's a little about me. So allow me to now share my screen. All right, I believe I'm visible. Great. So we have a set of questions before us. And the primary set of questions is, which is the Western ideology, Christianity or atheism? Hang on, let me make sure I'm doing the right thing. Okay. So today's questions, I want to break them down rather than just dealing with them as one block. It's not possible. Is Christianity a Western religion? Is it a Western faith, a Western ideology, if we would like? Number two is atheism Western? Same question applies to atheism. Number three, if that's the wrong set of questions, it doesn't really matter, or we find that they are Western, then the question is, should we go back to our African traditional religion? Should we just stop as Africans drinking from the cup of the West and go back to African traditional religion? And I have sort of suggested a fourth question, at least for my presentation: which way forward? What does that mean for us going forward? Before I continue, just a note on how I am approaching the questions. I am a historian. I'm a historian of Christianity, the history of Christianity. So that's my primary specialty, and that's the primary way I will be approaching today's questions. So yeah, sit tight. All right. Is Christianity a Western ideology? This is a popular question, or rather it's growing in popularity. And the answer, whether here or in the West, is often yes. People are saying yes, it's a Western ideology. Those who in Africa and beyond who have, chosen Christianity have basically have chosen the path of the West and brainwashed or otherwise. I don't share that view, and I'd like to just explain why. from a historical perspective. So let's talk about the origins of Christianity. Two ways of looking at the origins. First is its geographical origins. As far as we can tell from Christian texts, that's the Bible and other Christian texts, classical Christian texts, as well as non-Christian texts from that period, from the early Common Era. Christianity began in Jerusalem in the 1st century, and Jerusalem is in Palestine. So technically, this is Asia. We're saying this is Asia. Geographically, its origin is in Asia, in a Middle Eastern context. As the growth goes, and I'll talk about it a little, it goes in all directions: Africa, Asia, Europe. It goes in all directions. But geographically speaking, Christianity is, if we want to be precise and exact in terms of its exact origin, it's an Asian religion, so to speak. Its cultural origins, that's another way of looking at its origins. Christianity was born in a Hebrew cultural context, but soon entered other cultural contexts. Earliest Christianity was perceived to be a cult of the Jews. We see this in Christian texts, we see this in non-Christian texts, secular Roman texts. The belief was that Christianity was simply another bickering of the Jews. But slowly over time, the distinctions become clearer, and it becomes clear this is a totally different religion, faith, but couched in the historical context of the Jewish people, their cultural context in the Greco-Roman world. So yeah, in terms of geographical and cultural origins, it's Asian and Hebrew for precise answers. Just to discuss that a little more, I've drawn up a quick timeline. Now, according to Christian texts, and I'll use the Bible as an example, Acts chapter 1 to verse 7, and you see a sort of pattern of growth, how the Christian faith grows. This is also captured in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. It starts in Jerusalem and Judea. Now, a little of history here. Jerusalem was the capital of the Roman province of Judea, the Roman province of Judea in the early 1st century. And that's where the apostles of Jesus, the disciples of Jesus, were when the church began, or Christianity was born. And their command from Jesus was to go to those who are geographically close to them and culturally identical, Jews just like them, Judean Jews, not Galilean Jews at first, but Judean Jews who are exactly like them. And then the extension of that. Now, just before I go to that, this is in Acts 1 to 7. The earliest life of the Christian church is with Judean Jews. In chapter 6 and 7, you see a slight expansion to Hellenistic Jews. These are Greek-speaking Jews from outside Palestine who had come to Palestine for religious reasons, for business and the like. In chapter 8 of Acts, it moves to Samaria, a neighboring province of a race of people that were half Jewish, half something else. And so there's a geographical movement outward from Jerusalem into an area that is culturally and geographically a little removed, a little distance away, and similar. They shared a lot of cultural material, religious material. And lastly, the book of Acts in 1:8 says, to the ends of the earth. So looking at from verse chapter 9 to 28, that pattern continues. It moves from the geographically close and culturally close to the geographically and culturally distant. So it's moving out from Israel in all directions. Just as an example of this, what the all directions looks like, this is a map of the world, and roughly 635. I just chose 635 as a checkpoint because we have evidence of Chinese Christianity in 635. So you can see here in Europe, we see a few squares. The squares are not any statistically decided means of representing Christianity, but just for visual help. You see, Christianity is reached into France, the Iberian Peninsula, Germany, Greece, Turkey, Italy, but also exists in North Africa, quite strong in North Africa, Egypt, Nubia in what we call Sudan, Ethiopia. And in the Asian direction, it exists in the Levant, that's Palestine and the likes, Turkey, into Iraq, Iran, what we now call Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, all the way into Western China, and possibly even further. We know by 444 Persian missionaries had reached the Great Wall of China. Also some Christians in India. So at this point, you realize majority of the Christians are actually in Africa and Asia. All right, that's just a note for us to make. Now, jump forward another 500 years or so, and the game has changed. demographics have changed because of the rise of Islam. Islam cuts a wedge between European Christians and non-European Christians. So there's a decline of Christianity in North Africa, still some embers burning, but Egypt, still a strong Christian presence, Nubia, Ethiopia as well, but the numbers have gone down in these areas. In the Arabian Peninsula and other Asian places in the Middle East, the numbers also go down significantly. They sustain for a while, but slowly go down. India retains a population, China does retain a population of Christians, and Europe grows in its Christian population in this time. So at this point, most Christians lived in Europe at around 1100 CE. Most Christians live in Europe. Now, what happens around the year 500 is a shift begins to happen. Christianity moves from being a primarily Asian and African religion in terms of constituent membership to becoming a more European religion. And for about 1,000 years, Europe becomes the home of the faith, if I might put it. And so European Christianity becomes the dominant form of Christianity around the world because numerically, statistically, it's at the top. And what this does actually is Christianity becomes such an integral part of European religion that it becomes difficult to separate Europeanness and Christianity. And in a sense, that's a success of Christianity. It allows itself to enter the culture and transform the culture in that sense. And during this period, European Christians begin traveling around the world and spreading this form of Christianity, a European framed Christianity across the world. Right, so this is a picture of Christians by continent in 2020. I'll just run through that quickly. We still have many, many millions of people in the West, 268 million in North America alone, 565 in Europe. In the South, you have the bulk of Christians. Today, 67, 2 out of every 3 Christians are in a non-Western country. Your average Christian looks less white, if I may say, but looks more brown, so to speak. So as much as Euro-Christianity became a dominant faith, a dominant form of faith, it has become diverse because it's practiced by a variety of people. It's becoming more and more contextual. People take that dominant Euro-Christianity and convert it into contextual forms, things that are relevant to their own cultural issues and questions and problems. And so the question begs whether it is still Western or whether it continues to be Western. In some places, the outward form at least may still be very Western. There may be struggles with Westernness in their Christianity, but there is a shift, there is a definite movement away from that. Let me just jump on this quickly. I haven't managed my time well, but I'll try. Is atheism a Western ideology? Philosophically speaking, not necessarily, not really. And I say this because there are atheistic thought systems that are non-Western. For example, some of the sects of Buddhism are atheistic at root. They are atheistic at best, but in a sense, yes, classical atheism as we know it, as is often written about and in the public sphere, is a Western thought system or follows a Western thought system.
5 minutes left. Huh?
Okay, Sawa, thank you. In terms of the origins of atheism, classical atheism, I would say, traces its roots to the Enlightenment era in Europe. Enlightenment Europe, this is the period around 1650 to 1800. During this period, the philosophical patterns that had developed in European Christianity, in European philosophy and thought, became the grounds on which this atheism was built. Let me explain that a bit. The Christian Reformation era had come just before that, and the Protestant church was born. And in this period, what that did, it set a foundation, an ideological foundation of being able to question authority. So atheism borrowed that from the Christian Reformation, the ability to question authority. The second thing was the Reformation was littered by a litany of wars, Catholics and Protestants, different kinds of Protestants fighting against each other with sword and pen. And that really develops, that in religious intolerance became a very bad climate in which to be a Christian in Europe. Perhaps a third of Germany's population died in war. So what happens in this period is Enlightenment atheism develops, informed by despondency in Christianity and its structures. So sometimes it's not so much a question of God that is being questioned, it's the question of who gave the priests the right to determine that they can tell us what the truth is. Those kinds of questions, responding to Christianity and what is perceived to be its failure. Yeah, so there's a reaction to the Reformation. Faith or revelation is seen not the primary source of truth, but reason. Human reason is seen as the primary source of truth. There are other trends in the culture that are informing that, but this is something that also finds its root in that period. Just a few notes. Yeah, so this is what marks early atheism, early Enlightenment atheism: rejection of revelation, reliance on science as an arbiter of truth, empiricism as the method to get there, using the five senses to test what is true. But what eventually happens is that atheism limits itself to science and empiricism, and that those are not entirely sufficient to answer all the questions of life. And the following period of history, Romanticism, responds to that very question. Let me just say this: I don't think atheism's Westernness is a reason to reject it outright. I am of the opinion that we don't judge systems based on their source, we judge them based on their substance. So what is actually being said is what is more important than where it is being said from. Now, where it is being said from does shape what is being said, how it is understood, but ultimately we go for substance over source. So I don't think Westernness is a reason to reject atheism. We must judge atheism on its truth claims. So if this is the situation, whether you look at Africa, Christianity as imported, atheism as imported, African traditional religion, should we go that way? It's challenging to define ATR number one as a religion because African culture itself or African worldviews reject that kind of view. They don't see a division between faith and life. It's one whole. So, we have to judge it as a worldview, not as thank you, not as a religion. So the question is, how can this worldview be applied to life in light of the other things as well? ATR is holistic. I've mentioned that. Seeks to control life's uncertainties. That's a major thing about African traditional religion across the board. It's a very generic description. And it's very diverse, from polytheism to monotheism to all kinds of spiritual expressions. So as we think about that, what way should we go? What path should we follow then? Again, substance over source. That's my argument. So we don't judge something on its source, but its substance is more important. Christianity offers a basic framework that can be adapted into various cultures and worldviews. Atheism has drawn for itself narrow boundaries, in my view, for understanding the world as a whole. It limits itself to a certain way of seeing the world. And ATR can't just be accepted because its source is Africa. We must, again, also test its truth claims, just like every other system of thought. As an African and as a Christian, then I think African Christianity fits best. Using African traditional religion as a substratum, we lay on the truth claims of Christianity. So thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks a lot. And so for those who are just joining us, this is African Debates, and we are discussing whether Christianity or naturalism is a Western import into Africa, and whether this should even be a concern at all, and whether we should, and if it is a concern, whether we should go back to African traditional religion. So as not to waste time, we'll get to the secular perspective on this issue, and the secular Kenyan will take us through this. So whenever you start, I will start the stopwatch for 15 minutes opening statement.
Okay. First of all, I hope my audios are okay. Thank you very much, African Debates, Wandalo and the team. You guys are doing a good job, and everybody tuning in. Allan, that was a nice presentation, at least from the graphics, especially. And yeah, I don't have a presentation per se, but I have some notes that I don't really see like it's necessary to share because I will go them. They are very brief, but I think they will be sufficient to make my case. Yeah. So 3 questions, as Allan has outlined. First of all, who I am, sorry, I almost forgot to introduce myself. My name is Maurice Wanjohi, but I like to call myself secular Kenyan because I find that describing me much better. Yeah, I'm an ex-Christian. I'm an atheist currently. I've been an atheist for the last about a decade or so, 10 years, I would say. And yeah, I'm a finance person by profession and public policy. I'm more passionate about public policy from the perspective of especially social protections and social welfare for the people. Yeah, but above all, the thing I'm most proud of is I'm a humanist. And I think we are humanists in that sense. So the question of today is whether Christianity or atheism is a Western ideology. We had some discussions before here whether we should name it as a white man's ideology or we should name it as a colonial ideology. And so that we put things to perspective, I'll start by making some definitions of terms so that we don't talk over each other. Maybe you have a different understanding of a word and I'm talking of a different understanding. So let me define words in that proposition. The first thing is Christianity. This is, as my opponent has said, is a religion based on personal teachings of Jesus Christ and belief and practices. And yeah, and also a religion. A religion is a set of organizations that has core beliefs and rules that followers are expected to obey. Now, number two is atheism. What is atheism? Atheism is lack of belief in the existence of God or gods. So it's a negation of Christianity and any other religious belief. In other words, atheism is just saying, no, you guys have not meant the burden of proof. What is an ideology? When we talk about Western ideology, it's an ideology, whatever ideology. What is an ideology? An ideology is a set of opinions or beliefs of a group or an individual. They very often refer to a set of political beliefs or a set of ideas that characterize a particular culture. A system of ideas or ideals, especially one which forms basis for political theory or maybe a policy. So in Kenya, you can say we have maybe a capitalistic ideology. We have this kind of an ideology. And that please know that definition is very important as we proceed. Western, because we are talking about whether it's a Western ideology. The Western world is the West primarily. You know, it refers to nations that are in the whatever we call Australia or Australia, Europe and America. That is what we call as West colloquially. It's normally the West versus the global South. Now, my definition will also include the word colonial because it will be very important. Colonization. What is colonization? This is the act of power and domination of one nation by acquiring and maintaining full or partial political control over another sovereign nation. The country or nation which comes under the control of another foreign nation is known as a colony of the dominating country. Higher. Now, there's something else I need to define there called colonial mentality. There's a colonial ideology or colonial mentality. A colonial mentality is defined as internalized attitude of ethnic or cultural inferiority felt by people as a result of colonization. That is, they're being colonized by another because they are being colonized by another group. So it corresponds with the belief that the cultural values of the colonizer are inherently superior compared to that of themselves. So now we get with those definitions out of the way. Let's do answer the question. So is Christianity a Western stroke colonial ideology? I would have really wanted my opponent to start with the definition of Western because that's why I felt like we are crossing over, but I did do that during the rebuttals. Christianity, my opponent has done a very good job in the history. Christianity originated in the 1st century in Judea. It was born within Jewish traditions. Christianity developed in Judea in the mid-century based on the teaching of Jesus Christ and later of Paul Tasaras, or what we call the Paul. And originally Christianity was a small and organized sect and promised personal salvation after death. So before the Nicaea Creed, which was about 300, I think, 80, Christianity, 380 AD, Christianity was mostly seen as odd, but also disruptive by other, especially by the Roman Empire. Christianity was tolerated, but was also very persecuted and tended to be localized actions, especially by mob and governors, until at a time when Christianity reached a critical mass. That is the mid that century. Until 19th century, that left Jews in the position until that century. In 313 CE, the Emperor Constantine issued what people might call Edict of Milan, which granted Christianity, as well as not just Christianity, but other religion, legal status. Because by then in the Roman Empire, the religion of the emperor was the religion of everybody. But then now that there was a change through that edict where you can have your religion. And then some years later, 380 CE, the emperor, it's called Theodosius, issued another edict called the Thessalonica, in which he made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. It not only just said that, it condemned other Christian creeds and other religions and heresies, other religions, as foolish madmen, and authorized their punishment. That is a very important thing, because that now, I will demonstrate, I hope within 15 minutes or before the end of the debate, became like the modus operandi of Christianity. It criminalized all the other religion and called for their punishment for those who are not. That's why we get the sins of heresy and the rest. So Christianity expanded exactly as my opponent has said. I will not need to do North Africa to the whole of Europe, and of course from the Middle East. But North Africa, mostly the area around Middle East. This is the Alexandria or the Egypt and a bit Morocco around there. Yeah. The part normal, let's just call it North Africa for the sake of argument. What aided this spread of Christianity? Its spread was greatly aided by empire's political, that is the Roman Empire's political unification and extensive road system, as well as belief among many Christians that the religion was something anyone could adopt, regardless of regional or religious background. So that is the history. Now let's come to Africa, because we have to compare the African and the Western to get the contrast. Attempt to introduce Christianity in Africa, there were, of course, those times, as my opponent has said, a bit of Christianity before Islam came to North Africa. There were a bit of areas of Christianity, but it was not mainstream. Most people like to say that was the origin of Christianity, like the first people were African, but that it was not mainstream in Africa, because that area is North Africa, it's mostly desert and it's not mostly highly populated. Most Africa, when we talk of Africa, we mean sub-Saharan Africa. Like that's where almost 80-something% of people live. So it is started, the first attempt that we know to introduce Christianity in the sub-Saharan Africa was in Congo Kingdom in mid-15th century. So in 1951, king of the Congo Kingdom, he was converted to Catholicism, taking the Christian name Jao, and after coming into contact with Portuguese explorers. The conversion was to facilitate trade with Portuguese and increase the status of Congo Kingdom in the eyes of European states. However, this spread was limited to minor parts of the ruling class, mostly because the conversion was mostly for self-preservation, and most Africans in that area continued to practice their traditional African. The largest expansion of Christian in this area came under the Belgium rule. In 1885, Belgium monarch King Leopold II established a personal colony in Central Africa known as Congo Free State, in which in 1908 was annexed by Belgium as the Belgium Congo. Under both Free State, the Belgium regime Christian missions were encouraged to work in Congo as part of civilizing missions, which served as the colonial project justification for European public opinion. The expansion was facilitated by one of the worst and most overlooked genocide of the 20th century, of which as many as 13 million Congolese died in the Congo Free State. I think in the worst form, and most of these who died in forms of hanging, in terms of being amputated because they could not meet their daily portions. I think everybody knows about the Congo genocide by King Leopold II. It's one of the most underlooked things. And now to underscore how Christianity was part of this, not the genocide per se, but how it was facilitated by the colonization.
4 minutes left, huh?
Okay. So then I'll have to let me come to the East Africa. So in East Africa, where we are in Kenya, the Roman Catholic was the first one in 15th century by Portuguese. Everyone knows Portuguese, but it never got traction until 1884 when Dr. Kraft and his wife came, and according to and that is when they followed the colonization pattern that spread across East Africa. According to updated data of 2021, there are nearly 700 million Christians in Africa, which is about 30% of the total population for the Christians worldwide. Christianity, just like now, this is where we need to understand whether it's a Western idea. Christianity, just like colonization, was meant to undermine traditional African identity and in turn replace it with quote unquote superior Western practices. So missionaries, because they went hand in hand with colonizers, in attempt to civilize African, prohibited various African practices. These were things like our culture, we used to worship in the tree. That one was seen as worship of the idol. Their culture that used to worship at on the mountain. Dancing was highly prohibited when the colonizers came and missionaries. African way of like sacrifice. Spiritualism, where people used to associate with their ancestors, was seen as evil spirit and demonic. Things like polygamy, things like initiation practices were quote unquote modernized. So the Bible was introduced, and using the power of colonizers, it was supposed to be obeyed without question. So in summary, is Christianity a Western ideology? Yes, Christianity is a Western colonial ideology used to undermine Christian identity. Does that answer matter? Yes. Religions are equal, all religions are equally false, but they carry with them an immense amount of cultural importance. Every culture believes in itself importance, and it is the center of its divinity. This gives culture, the people in that culture, a sense of pride and dignity. Christianity is a Jewish culture, is a manifestation of Jewish culture. That is why the Christian God identifies as a Jew. His favorite people are Jew. His favorite place is Jerusalem. Everything is Jewish about it. Just like Hinduism is an Indian culture. The gods of Hinduism are Indian, their favorite place is India. It is a manifestation of their culture as far as it is. Same case with Islam, is an Arabic culture. Even if there are more Islam who are Arabic than or not Arabic than Arab. That's why when you become a Muslim, you have to learn Arabic. The prophets are Arabic. The book is in Arabic. It's an manifestation of their culture.
1 minute left.
Okay. So any attempt to impose foreign culture on people that is not central to them makes them lose their sense of personal pride and identity. Most Christians, God are portrayed as white. To make it worse, the devil is portrayed as black. It is no wonder some Christian sects like Mormons believe that being black is a curse or evil and being white is a blessing. The Bible was also used in some cases to justify slavery. And as you know, there is no race that suffered slavery more than black people. So it is that makes it is the use of such a Christian where a foreign culture is imposed on you that brings the loss of personal pride that can make you go ahead and defend a book that justifies whatever your culture has suffered all along. I had one more paragraph, but it seems can I get 1 more minute only?
It's like 16 seconds left, but I guess you can add some time onto it, but just finish up.
Let me finish up in 1 minute. So yeah, Christianity is a Western culture. It ought to be accepted in the West. And African culture ought to be accepted as African. However, African culture, and this is the final question, is African culture, does it matter? Should we go back to our African culture? Yes and no. We must embrace ideas, not because they're Africans, not because they're Western, not because they're what. We must embrace ideas based on evidence. And actually, this answers the final part, the way forward. which the way forward is evidence. The idea is not supported. If an idea that is not supported by evidence has no place in 2023 and beyond. Christianity, Atheism, Islam, African religion, all have to be judged based on their evidence and not merely by their source. Thank you.
Wow, wonderful. Just had the two opening statements, and it seemed as if almost at the end there, they almost agreed. So that it doesn't matter whether something is African, but whether it lends credence to evidence. So this is the African debates, and we are discussing whether Christianity or naturalism, and by extension atheism, is Western, and whether the question actually matters, and whether if it's a significant thing, whether we should revert back to African traditional religion. So now we are going to go to cross-examination, and we'll start with the secular Kenyan asking questions to Allan. And so there'll just be short questions about the opening statement. So not on other things, about just the opening statement of Allan. You'll ask him questions about what he presented. And then Allan is to give short responses so that you can get in as many questions as possible. It's only 5 minutes. And then Allan can respond as quickly as possible for 5 minutes. And then after 5 minutes, I'll just tell you to stop, and then Allan will start asking questions. So you can start whenever you are ready. Secular Kenyan, you can start asking questions, and then I'll put the timer when you start asking.
Actually, I have 4 questions for Allan. Number one, I wanted to understand what you understand by Western ideology. For you, is it just about the race or the place in the West, or is it about the culture, the identity of the culture? I wanted you to clarify that a little bit. Yeah. You're muted.
Good question. Thank you. I think I'll pretty agree with you. Let me first say Western ideology. Let me answer the Western bit. I think following the frameworks of thought, cultural frameworks of thought and behavior that come from the West, and I agree with you on the places that you call the West: North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. So that's Western. And when we talk about ideology, then things that, or rather the framework that come, the systems of thought that come out of that cultural framework. So yes, as you said, often ideologies used to describe political systems of thought and the like, but it's not limited to that alone. So yeah, I hope that's clear.
Okay, number 2, what exactly do you understand by the term atheism? Because I'm confused when you say Christianity is not a Western ideology, but atheism somehow is. I thought they would follow one another. Maybe to some extent you are mixing it with secularism, I thought. Maybe you can clarify that.
Not necessarily. Maybe it's because atheism has been so defined by its relationship to Christianity. The origin, what I'm calling classical atheism, that which rose in Enlightenment Europe, was in response to Christianity. So the traditional relationship has shaped the way we understand atheism. Atheism is, as you said, a negation of God or gods. It could be, a polytheistic system or pantheism or whatever. So for me, it is any system that negates that. And that's why I began by saying, in a sense, it's not, because you have sects from, the Indian subcontinent, mostly of the Buddhist religion, that are atheistic, philosophically speaking, are true. So why I say it is Western is because classical atheism, and I qualified that, classical atheism has its roots in Western Europe, actually, and Western European systems of thought or ways of approaching the world that they lived in at that time.
2 minutes left. Huh?
Okay. In terms of actually finish with the way of approaching the world, something else you say about interesting is you seem to criticize the reason. You say reason, empiricism, evidence. We like you say, atheism is only relying on reason and empiricism as the only way to truth. I'm just curious, what other way would you propose?
No, I actually didn't say that. I said classical atheism tended, or well, what I meant would be tended to prioritize reason over faith. So actually, in the end, what happened is they chucked faith altogether, rejected faith altogether as a way of interpreting truth, or rather, faith is represented by revelation, so scriptures, right? So there is no authoritative scripture that can help an atheist arrive at truth, because there is no authoritative God or gods to provide that scripture anyway. So yeah, I think that might clarify what I was trying to say, if I leave it there. so that I don't overextend the answer.
Yeah, the final one was like, do you think if Kenya was not colonized, do you think if Kenya was not colonized, if the missionary and the colonizers never came, do you think you'd be a Christian today?
The chances would be lower, but there's a possibility. Because, for example, I currently work with missionaries, I must say. And one of the interesting things I found as a historian is there is a lingering memory, pre-colonial lingering memory of
1 minute
Christianity,
left,
Christianity coming from Ethiopia, south from Ethiopia. It can still be argued that was colonial Christianity, depending on how you interpret the Ethiopian empire. But there is a possibility, because the West was not the only proponent of Christianity. It was the major proponent at that time, but not the only. Thanks.
Okay, I'll post there. Thank you.
Oh, actually, you still had 40 seconds left. If you want to give it to Allan, he can have more time to ask questions.
Okay, he can go ahead, but he can tell me whether you think what your comparison between reason and faith. Do you think we should faith and evidence are like contra, like they are opposite, and
they're not. I would say they're not. In fact, if anything, the Christian faith was the crucible in which the scientific revolution was born. Because of now what the Christian faith does is it recognizes the place of faith and reason, but it subjugates reason to revelation. All right. What atheism did was flip that order and then discard revelation eventually. All right. So I don't think there is a disconnect. I'm actually of the opinion that there's a very strong relationship and that's why both should be taken seriously. So evidence is welcome, but the question then is, and maybe can I switch over into my questions?
Yes. And so for those who are joining us, Allan is now asking questions to the secular Kenyan with regards to the topic of whether Christianity or atheism is a Western religion. So Allan, you can continue.
Yeah. My question is, are there other systems of knowing outside empirical means of testing knowledge? Is there something that can be, when I come home and find my wife is feeling bad, how exactly do I tell that? Are there other systems of knowing, and how do you account for that in terms of evidence? So that would be my question to you. Sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, by other you mean I'm lost in that.
Okay, let me ask the question this way. You've talked about the importance of evidence, and I agree with you. Maybe what we disagree on is what constitutes that evidence. So what in your opinion would be reliable evidence to make a judgment on something?
Reliable judgment depends on the claim. As the common saying that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, average claims require average evidence. So for me, it's evidence nonetheless. It's not necessarily, it's not every evidence that has to rise to the scientific level, reviewed, whatever. But I think we use empiricism every day, things we observe, whatever we know, it's a builder for the past. So for me, the key word is, I don't see how you would have a claim of knowledge without the word evidence. And that is, I think that's the part where I disagree with the faith, because I think they are opposite of each other.
Okay, well, yeah, well, on that one we'll agree to disagree. I have so many questions. Let me see. You mentioned to us that Christianity is a Jewish religion at root, and but then later you came and said then we should leave it for the West. Don't you find that there's a disconnect there?
No, I said, and I think you also alluded that Christianity originated in Judea.
Yes.
Yes. Province of Jerusalem in Judea. Was in Judea. So originality of Christianity, it originated as from Jewish tradition, the first century. And then it
3 minutes left. Huh?
And then it evolved now, as explained, to Roman Empire, to North Africa today. So that it found its roots. Its roots is in Jewish culture, and it has been mostly supported by the Western world, probably Catholicism and Europe and that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Now there's the often made claim that you've also made that Christians and missionaries went hand in hand. are there examples we can cite of missionaries who preceded colonialists without bringing the baggage of colonialism until the colonialists arrived? And how would you start?
You will have to define where it is tried, and I actually give you examples in Congo and the Portuguese in East Africa who came there in the 15th century. They did not succeed. It did not succeed to a large extent. That's why the Roman Catholic was first introduced about 400-500 years ago. The same case in Congo, but it was very small areas. The only time it succeeded, it was when it was backed by political class, or what you can call colonization. But colonization was largely political, but they went in hand. So yeah, to answer your question specifically, yes, but it did not succeed.
Okay. Last question of many, but the last one. You made the claim all religions are equally false, and you said that the burden of proof is on the Christians or whoever else to provide evidence that there is a God or gods. I'm curious what evidence can be provided to the contrary, that there is no God. What kind of evidence would you provide for that?
Now, this is interesting. First of all, philosophically, I don't have the burden of proof, but to define
1 minute left.
Yeah, to define my position specifically, I'm an atheist to Abrahamic God. I believe the God of Christian, Islam, and Judaism does not exist.
Okay.
I am agnostic to all other gods because I've not studied 20,000 plus gods. So I can't definitely say they don't exist. But I can definitely say the gods of Abraham, the God of Christianity, that cannot exist philosophically or logically, at least as defined in the holy text. So to answer your question, there's the philosophical argument where a God cannot be so good that there's a problem or evil. There's the issue of justice and mercy, all that Epicurus analogy. So we can provide a lot of evidence as to show that God does not exist, as much as we don't have the burden of proof. Yeah, but ideally, the one who makes the claim that there is a God should accompany that with a proof. Ideally, and then not just the claim of God, any claim. Anybody who makes a claim should accompany that with evidence. Otherwise, the claim fails and go back to default setting where we say we don't know.
Oh, wonderful. And the cross-examination time is up. Thank you guys for that. And so for those joining us, this is African Debates, and we're discussing whether naturalism or Christianity is a Western ideology, whether it matters, and whether we should go back to African traditional religion. And I want us to talk actually a lot about African traditional religion. And we are actually getting into the rebuttal period. And I'm hoping that particular part of African traditional religion will be spoken about, especially since there is no proponent of African traditional religion here. So I would like that to be touched on. And so right now, we'll have Allan, who is going to start his rebuttal, and is going to rebut what Secular Kenyan said in the opening statement, as well as what he has said in the cross-examination. So this is 10 minutes now. You have 10 minutes for your rebuttal. So whenever you start, I'll start the timer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Charles, for the opportunity. Maurice, Secular Kenyan, I'm quite happy to see you have your facts on point. Thank you very much for that. The details are quite correct, and that's wonderful to hear. Some of the areas that where we diverge, we agree on a lot actually, but some of the areas where we diverge include, let me start with the claim that Christianity was meant to undermine African culture. Well, I guess that's qualified in the context of what you're saying, but it gave me the impression that Christianity was launched into Africa with a specific goal or purpose of undermining African culture. Again, this is contingent on how you understand Christianity and how you understand the internal workings of Christianity, I suppose. Because Christianity is in itself, first and foremost, a missionary faith. It is part of one of its major teachings is that it must be missionary, it must be shared with others, and that sort of thing. So it would not be unrealistic to also claim that those who communicated their faith throughout the periods, whether the Portuguese, who I think did a horrible job wherever they went, Congo, Monomotapa, Mombasa, wherever. I think it would be unrealistic to also say that there were no missionary motivations. Now, I do agree that there were political motivations as well, commercial motivations and the like. So to flatten it to simply, it was, let me put it in my words. I hope I don't misquote what you mean. And the agenda was to undermine African culture. May not be a very fair judgment of what happened. Now, secondly, I think just on that, I think I did mention earlier that one of the successes of Christianity in the European context is that Christianity's ability to be contextualized to a particular worldview or a particular cultural expression is its greatest, should I say, asset. You've mentioned the example of the Arabs who Islam is unable to contextualize as fully as Christianity. Islam has a rigidity in terms of its sacred texts, its language of communication in terms of prayer, in terms of names, and basically to become a Muslim is to become a sort of half Arab, so to speak. Christianity offers a different perspective where it takes the substratum of whatever cultural material there is and places itself on that. So I think the success of European Christianity eventually became its downfall in that it was unable to separate, or rather Europeans were unable to separate their culture from their political ambitions and commercial ambitions. So there is a question there that needs to be answered. I think Christians have the harder time answering this question, but the question is, how then do you judge Christianity in that sense? Do you judge it do you judge the European culture, or do you judge the Christian faith for the failures that happened? That's a question I have there. And I would be opined to say the failure was in the culture recognizing where the boundaries are. So I would, just challenging that argument. A few other things I'd like to say. Now, the way you presented colonization, yes, in an African context, it does, of course, African colonization by European powers. That's agreed on. But the way you shaped your argument gave the impression that that is as far as colonization goes. How then do you justify the same thing where Christianity was not involved and colonization happens, say in Europe, the Japanese conquering the Chinese or the Koreans or things like that? How do you work that out? Is Christianity then solely guilty, or you are dealing with something else that bears the blame for whatever happened in those colonial contexts? Let me see. Now, again, going back to your final position, your final discussion of Africa, let's talk about African traditional religion. We agreed that we don't simply accept something because it's from our backyard. We accept it based on its truth claims. Well agreed. The question or questions that would definitely arise out of that is, or rather, we've agreed there must be some evidence, there must be some judgment of substance, as I called it. Then how do you, trying to find the words to frame what I'm thinking. African traditional religion, what evidences might that offer? Let's use, you can use any particular religion that you're familiar with, any African traditional religion. What evidences might that particular religion offer for the existence of a god or gods? I know you've specified your atheism to, should I say, I don't know if he's still there or he's disappeared.
It seems like
yeah, I think he's disappeared.
But you can just continue, and then we'll see how we proceed.
Yeah. I'm trying to clarify it's very clear in my head, not as clear in my mouth. How would Maurice discuss evidences for faith outside the Christian religion, especially in these African traditional religions, number one? Number two, in terms of African traditional religions and Christianity. Now, again, my contention is throughout, Maurice has not understood the inner workings of Christianity well enough to make an effective argument against it in all cases. So I mentioned, for example, that you have forms of Christianity that are Western in their form, but they build on the substratum of another worldview. For example, they take an African worldview and build on that to create a unique cultural expression of Christianity. How then would whether he would agree with that? I'm curious to hear him more on that, whether he would agree with that expression and whether he would, what he would say about that in particular. All right, I think he is back.
Yeah, he's back.
He's back. So maybe I can run through that again. Yeah. I was saying just before you dropped off, Maurice, that
oh, sorry about that. Someone switched Wi-Fi literally.
No, bro, it happens. It happens. That's okay.
Oh man.
The devil anyway.
You're blaming you're saying we shouldn't blame the devil.
Or it's the limitations of naturalism. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
I was arguing, or rather positing while you were away. I'm not sure whether you understand well the internal workings of Christianity and how it transmits from one culture to another, and why it has actually been so successful in doing that and taking cultural forms. Because my argument is that it takes a substratum of a worldview that exists, whether it is a Kikuyu worldview, a Luo worldview, Amharic, or whatever Malaysian worldview, and builds its essential teachings into that, creating a unique expression of that. And that's the case with African traditional religion, I would say. It provides the substratum, provides the base framework into which Christianity works itself in. I don't know what your comment would be on that, and whether you think that is an actual thing or it's simply something being slapped on top of that. Yeah, I think I'll stop there for now.
All right. I guess thanks for that. I think you've used much less time than we thought you would.
Yeah.
But it's like 9 minutes, so that's okay. I think Secular Hangout is having an issue with his video. It's let me see.
Okay. It's not on my side. I think it's on your side.
Don't know if you can help out there. Because
if you're okay, you can continue with the audio. Or
yeah, you can continue with the audio as we try to figure out what the issue is.
Okay. Yeah, you had stopped it. Okay.
So 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll probably take less than that. So I think much of what I would have rebutted he has answered in the question. One of the things I had with the presentation is the definition of Western, because I think Western mostly is confused with the geographical, but I think it's more of a cultural issue. It's more of an ideological issue. In politics, we would call capitalism and the issue of free trade in public policy. Those are what we call Western ideology. So yeah, that was cleared. Yeah, atheism on secularism. I think my argument is that once you define atheism as a negation of your position, then it cannot be an ideology, because it's just atheism is a response to one question. Do you think there is sufficient evidence to warrant the belief in a claim that there is God? Once your answer is no, that does not tell you anything. That does not tell you about my my morality. It does not tell you my belief in system of government. It does not tell you whether I'm a good person or a bad person. It just tells you it's a response, is a single question response. So, and based on that, it cannot become an ideology. And so I would say there's nothing like atheist ideology, but it's a response to one question. Yeah. So the other thing I have a problem with is your definition of faith or your use of faith. I've not had the definition, but the way you are using it, you're trying to correlate it with evidence. It cannot be. I mean, my own submission, it cannot be, because atheism, not atheism, faith is belief without evidence. In fact, it's well defined in the Bible, in the Hebrew 11, things hope seen, but not hope for, something like that. So it is the belief in absence of faith, in belief in absence of evidence. Once you have evidence, it becomes knowledge, and the word faith loses meaning. If we had evidence, or we had empirical evidence, we would not need faith. The very innovation of including the word faith is an admission that we don't have enough evidence to warrant a belief in that claim. So yeah, and I find that a problem with Christianity, especially relating to this topic, because the way it was presented as when you impose people faith, then it becomes possible to believe anything. I have a problem with Christians. I have a problem with Christians who are criticizing the current Mackenzie story in Kilifi, the genocide. They're saying people should not fast for more than, I don't know, a few days. And I'm asking them, how many days should they fast? How many days? How many days should you fast? Because these people have faith that they are going to fast like Jesus for 40 days and survive it. So if they fast for 30 days and die, it's there in the Bible. So the use of the word faith opens a can of worms where it can be used for good things or for bad things. The problem with faith is you start with a conclusion. I want to do X. Let me now go find the reasons why I should do X. Instead of working backward where you don't know the conclusions, the methodology and evidence leads to that conclusion. So faith, I think it is important that you define for us the word faith as you like to use it, because I think it's contrary to evidence. In fact, it defines the very lack of evidence. Now, there's a question you wanted to ask, not a question per se, but the issue of spread of the spread of Christianity in Africa through colonization. That is an observed fact, but as much as they were too different, the question you're asking about the China and India and why colonization happened there, but it did not, there was no culture erosion per se. Thank you for bringing me back. So you see, I'll give you a better example. There is colonization in Africa and there's colonization in India. Actually, let's say Kenya. Kenya was colonized by British. India was also colonized by British. Kenya is a Christian nation. India is still a Hindu and largely Hindu nation. So why did British not manage to inflate their culture, to impose their culture on Indians, but they managed to impose it on Kenyans? In this case, I'm using the word culture for Christianity. Because the African culture, and I think that's why Wandala was saying we need to discuss African religions were not, first of all, homogeneous. There is no one single African religion you can say this is the African religion, and this is its tenets and belief and whatever. Every tribe, and there are over 700 of them, have their different beliefs in their religion, the different ways of worship. And so it was easy to take these small groups and demonstrate to them how they are not part of the larger group. While in India, that was not the case. They had a well-established religion for over 3, 4, 5 millennia, and it had structures and ways. So that's why it was not impossible to impose them. And actually, I think that's part of the reason why India got independence much earlier, because it was religion was a uniting factor. Hinduism was a uniting factor for them. But in Africa, only maybe the race was a uniting factor. Yeah. So yeah, that one is it. I don't think I have much more to criticize on you, but I would just like those two definitions. And I think yeah, from there we can respond to that. On Wandalo, the moderator asking if we talk much about African tradition. As I've said, it's a very loaded thing, and there is very little to talk about because there's not much that is documented. Unfortunately, it's African traditions in largely relied on or passing on stories from one generation to the other. Number two, they were not homogenized. So as a Kikuyu, I can talk about our traditions, but they'll be different from the 45 others in tribes in Kenya. And that is why the conclusion is they should be the African religions beliefs. I don't put them, other than the cultural aspects, I don't put them in a much more higher pedestal than any other religion. There are evidence for Christianity, for Islam, for African religions. All the evidence for all of them is equally poor from where I stand. So yeah, it should not be an option. We should not move from fire to the frying pan. Thank you.
All right. The rebuttals have ended quite early. And so I guess we have more time for Q&A, which is supposed to be 20 minutes. So for those who are joining us, we have able debaters here, Allan, and the secular hangout. Oh, secular hangout now, not secular Kenya. But yeah, so like we are discussing whether Christianity or naturalism are Western ideas, and whether that is even should be a concern, and whether we should go back to African traditional religions. And so like we've already had the opening statements, we've had them questioning one another, and they've rebutted one another. And so now we want to get to the questions, and we have quite a number of questions on the YouTube live stream. And so like I'll just get onto the questions, and so how we want to proceed. When I ask a question, the person who is answering will answer, and then maybe a short comment can be made by the person who was not addressed. So that's how we'll go through each question. And we have a maximum of 20 minutes. And then after that, we will just go straight to the final statements. So just starting the timer. So like we will start with one question, and I guess this was directed to the secular Kenyan. That how are we to discuss atheism as a lack of belief? Like, so he's asking, are you discussing your psychological state of mind, or can you cite your source for atheism being defined as a lack of belief? So that's the question. I don't know if you've understood.
Partially, I think I've understood it partially. So because I think the problem with the one questioning is the definition of atheism. And I think that's what I had a problem with, even with the motion. It is defined, it's putting atheism and Christianity or any other religion on the same level. While in actual sense, as we have correctly defined, me and Allan, it's a negation. Atheism cannot exist if you don't make a claim. Like I cannot say no to a question you have not asked. You have to ask that question first. That question or that proposition you have to make is the Christianity proposition. You're saying there is a God. I'm saying, okay, from my default position, and this is very clear, the default position is not Christianity or atheism. The default position is we don't know. The default position is agnostic. There's so many things we don't know, including the claim of God. We don't know. So when we are seated here relaxing, we don't know anything. Someone comes and say, oh, there's a God. There's a Christian God and with all the attributes. And so the atheists only ask, where is the evidence? If you don't bring enough evidence to support that claim, my default position will be your God will not be your God does not exist. My default position is you have not proved your claim. I'm going back to my default position of I don't know. That is for any other God. But if you provide a definition of a God who has contradicting personalities, who is both white and black at the same time, who is both angry and happy, who is both good and bad at the same time, then that one we can conclusively through deduction say that one cannot exist, at least in a logical sense. But for any other claim, we go back to we don't know. So maybe you can repeat that question to hear if there's something I've missed, but I think that's it. So we cannot discuss atheism without, atheism is not a thing, it's a response to a question or a proposition. Madalo, you are muted.
Oh, I'm also muted. Oh, and I was telling Allan he was muted while I was muted. Oh, so I was asking Allan if you want to comment on what the secular Kenyan has said.
Not really. Yeah, not really.
Okay. All right. So I'll go to a question, a comment someone made. I think it might be something. It's like talking about the idea of agreeing to disagree. I think maybe it was Allan who mentioned it at some point, or one of you mentioned it. So like he's in the business, like whether that is incomplete business. Like, should we agree to disagree, and then what happens? I think something along those lines. I don't know if Allan, you want to comment on that? Like whether they agree to disagree business, the way to go, and that's it. Let's go home. Like comment on that.
Yeah, I think there's always room to agree to disagree, because any responsible intellectual discourse requires that everyone has a position. And for example, Maurice will see things in my argument that he believes are fundamentally flawed. Likewise, I will see things that are fundamentally flawed in his argument. So no matter how long we go at it, unless those fundamental issues are addressed, then there will be no resolution to it. And I don't believe debates necessarily end in resolutions. It may be unfinished business, and it can be left like that, because sometimes then there is actually no headway being made. Yeah, so it's unfinished business, and that's okay.
Yeah, you are muted again, but I'll make a comment on that.
Oh, sorry. Oh yeah, I was actually asking whether you can make a comment on it. Okay, I think I'll remove the mute button. Yeah, okay.
So of course, you see, people are very different. People are very different. There are 7 billion people in this world. Those are 7 billion different ways of looking at things. Even within Christianity, there are over 30,000 sects, and everybody thinks the other one is not very accurate. So yeah, the whole essence of debate is to see ideas you agree, see where you disagree, and where you disagree. The only way we can fail to agree to disagree is if he became an atheist or I became a Christian. And and in that case, even if I became a Christian, I became a Catholic and he's not a Catholic, we will have just narrowed our differences, but not minimized them. So the whole of debate is to try and see the whole importance of any debate is, first of all, is honesty, to express your point honestly, as candidly as you see it, and support your argument, and then hope the other side do the same, and then you argue the differences. There will always be differences. So yeah, we can agree to disagree. I think we 50-50, we agree on 50% of the propositions. I think the other 50 we don't. And that's normal, and that's how it should be from one start.
All right, thanks for that. I'll just go to the next question, which says there was the comment made that all religions are false. So someone is asking, like, what is the evidence that all religions are false?
All religions are equally false. Or let me say, all religions are equally untrue. What I mean by that is, that's not a philosophical statement. That's a very colloquial statement. I'm just saying, where is the evidence? There are many propositions, and that is why I said the argument that I'm a very atheistic when it comes to Abrahamic God, but very agnostic. Because if you go to a certain sect in India that believes their God is the cow, and you ask them where is their God, they might show you the cow, and I might have very little to rebut. So for that, I could debate whether that cow has God-like features or attributes. But all religions are equally false in the manner in which they provide the evidence. If any one of them was right, it would not be appearing in historical or theological. It would be appearing on social science journals as a fact. It will not, number two, it will not require faith. It will not require faith. The very fact that you require faith at any point should put a lot of question mark in whatever claim is being made there. Because faith is belief without evidence. It is whatever Hebrew 11 calls things hoped for but not seen, or blah, blah, blah. So yes, if there is one, and I'm now shifting the burden to the one question. If he thinks there's one that is not false, come forth with evidence. And I'm not saying I'll believe it, because believing, I also believe, is not something you don't choose to believe. Like I can't say Allan is wearing a green shirt. I think he's wearing a white shirt, but from tomorrow evening, I'm going out to believe it's a green shirt. Once I see it, it automatically registers that Allan is wearing a green shirt. I don't have a choice. I can't say it from tomorrow, I'm going to start believing in this. So once you bring out the evidence, it will be automatic. I will not have a choice, and everybody will not have a choice. We'll just believe it. Yeah.
Allan, you want to comment on that, or can go to the next question? You can unmute first.
Without going down a rabbit hole, because this is a potential rabbit hole, I think one of the areas where definitely there's room for more discussion between Maurice and I is on the threshold for evidence. What is considered as evidence, and how you arrive at saying this is evidence, because that again brings it to question, then how do we know, right? That's really the question at the bottom of it. How do we know? And yeah, so weaved into his answer is that question. I can hear it at the bottom. How do we know? How do we know? How do we know? And the traditional Christian epistemology or basis for answering that question is very different from his. That's what I'm saying. It's a rabbit hole that I'm not sure I want to go down at this moment. But yeah, that's the only thing I'd just add there. That's, I think, a fundamental reason we may not agree, so to speak. There's room for disagreement there. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. All right. I guess we could go to the next question, and this is addressed to Allan. So it's in two. Like, what's your opinion about ancestors who lived before Christianity came to Africa? And then, do you think you'd be a Christian if you were born in Afghanistan, or if you were born 300 years ago in Kenya? I think kind of the secular Kenyan had asked you a similar question. So I guess, I think if you can remember, so the first one is whether what happened to our ancestors who lived before Christianity came to Africa, and then if you were born in Afghanistan or pre-colonial Kenya. Yeah.
Number one, there are Christians in Afghanistan, believe it or not. So I hope that answers that part of the question. Again, this is a question of a failure to understand internal Christian thinking or theology. That's the base issue. But the other question is, I struggle to answer questions like this because they hypothesize something, and yeah, in a sense, you're answering something that is not there. As Maurice said, you can't answer a question that has not been asked, in a sense. So if Usain Bolt was a woman, would he be the fastest woman on earth? That's hard to answer. But just to try and answer this question, Romans chapter 2, the book of Romans 2 addresses this question. And the basic reasoning, without going down into the exegesis of that passage, the basic reasoning given by the Apostle Paul is this: God has a standard. He has a standard of righteousness, of holiness, and he has, by virtue of him being the creator and him having the right to bring everything to obedience to him, or to be answerable to him, everyone is accountable to him, then he has the right to set that standard of what is right, what is wrong, what is acceptable before him or not. The writer of Romans 1 and 2 says, the Jews had this standard revealed to them in the Jewish law. They failed to keep the standard. They tried very hard, but they failed. Or they thought they were better than others because they had a sort of early entry ticket, but they actually failed at that. Then he addresses the question, what of those who did not have this revealed standard, the scriptures? And that's the person, my great-great-grandfather, who was born 300 years ago in Kenya or wherever it is he was born. The same question is answered in the book of Romans, and it simply says, God had set a standard. And in fact, he allowed that standard to be ingrained in their own cultural framework, within their own cultural laws. That's why every single culture there is on earth says stealing is bad, right? Of course, there are kinds of stealing that they declare good, but in essence, fundamentally stealing is wrong. For example, that's something that Christians believe God has ingrained into the psyche of humanity, into who humans are. So God has given us that standard. But even with that general, what Christians would call general revelation, it's non-specific, not to any one person at any one time in any one place. It's for all people, all places, all times. Even with that standard, they have failed to keep the standard. That's the teaching of Romans, the book of Romans. So therefore, they fall short of God's requirements, and he's justly, righteously justified to judge them as he pleases, as he does. So I think in that, if you read Romans 2, it gives a very clear, concise flow of thought on that matter. So that's how I'd answer that question.
Secular Kenyan, want to make a comment? Or I just go to the next question?
No, I'll just not a comment, but I'll ask a question to Allan to complement that. Do you think religion is geographical? Like India is largely Hindu, so your probability of being born there, being a Hindu, is very high. Kenya is Christian and Western. Saudi Arabia, if you're born, do you think that I think that's the essence that the question I was trying to come to, like, do you think the chances of you being born in, if your parent had immigrated before you're born to India or to Saudi Arabia, do you think you'll still be a Christian? So do you think it's geographical, and that plays a larger role than even conviction?
Yes and no. Yes, because as you said, the probability of Patel born somewhere in Gujarat is that he would be a Hindu, right? But then you still have cases of people born in those places who are not Hindu. For example, I mentioned, historically speaking, there is a minority of Christians in India who have been there since ancient times. So again, India is wide. It's a broad question. It's difficult to say that's the only way that things would go. The probability is high that if you were born in the middle of Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim, or you'd have no other opportunity. Now, this again, internal workings of Christian theology, the sovereignty and providence of God. God sovereignly determines who is born where. Acts 17, I think 26 to the end, talks about how God has set the boundaries and times and places that people would live, and that kind of thing. So in a sense, God has sovereignly ordained that. Now, we may not be able to understand that fully because of the finite nature of our knowledge and understanding vis-a-vis the infinite nature of this sovereign God. So why was I born in Kenya? I have no answer for you. I don't know, because God willed it that I was born in Kenya to parents who had this and that and this and that, right? So in a sense, that is, there's an unknowability of those details in the middle there. And yeah, so I think that's the basic answer. Just something to add on to the Hinduism question. You mentioned it during your rebuttal, and I was quite intrigued. You treat Hinduism as if it is a monolithic, one kind of religion, 5,000 years old. That's actually not a very good understanding of Hinduism as I understand it. It's actually as diverse as Christianity and as Islam in terms of very many different kinds of sects. What they share is a common set of scriptures, as do the Christians, as do the Muslims, etc., etc. There's a lot of variety and diversity within Hinduism. It has changed and developed over those however many thousands of years. So yeah, just a note. It was presented as if that was one major standard for us across India that, prevented this from that. Yeah.
All right. We have 3.5 minutes left, and wanted to get through as many questions as possible. If you can respond in 15 seconds, guys, try and see if you can. 15 seconds each response. So this question says that they have not heard anything on how naturalism is African, but they've heard a lot about how Christianity is not. So if they are to accept anything on the basis of evidence, so there's that whether if naturalism is not African, I think the idea is why is this idea of Christianity being Western always an issue if naturalism is also not African? Shouldn't shouldn't we also have memes on, oh, atheism is not African, things like that. And then also there's the idea of what's the evidence for atheism or naturalism, if there's also evidence being asked for Christianity. So just a very quick response, because we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah,
Who should start?
I think we
Go ahead.
started. We started 5
Go ahead.
minutes. We started 5 minutes late. We can maybe add that 5 minutes. But naturalism. The question is naturalism. If you notice in my presentation, I avoided the word naturalism because it's being used as a synonym with atheism. And I've said atheism is a response to one question. Naturalism is just believing things are just physical, the way they are presented in nature. That is not like science is just like science. Science is not neither African or Western or whichever culture. Science is science. If you provide evidence, it's there. And that is the same case with naturalism. It's not cultural. It's more scientific, I would say that. And the second question, whether there is a rest or there is evidence, I think I've addressed that. I don't have the burden. I have evidence that the Abrahamic God does not exist. I have no evidence that any other God exists, but I'm not making the claim they don't exist either. I'm making a claim. I'm responding to their claim. So let them come with back up their claim with evidence, and we can address that evidence.
Allan, a very quick response.
Yeah, I agree with secular Kenyan that the understanding of naturalism there is, it's not, I think, to split the fine hairs, it is not synonymous to atheism, but naturalism is in essence an atheistic philosophy, basically, that sees the natural material world as all there is, and there is nothing beyond that. So in effect, there is no supernatural, immaterial being called God or beings called God. So naturalism is atheistic, but it is not atheism. I think that's how I would put it. And I agree with Charles on that. So sorry, I don't know. I'm calling you Charles.
just some correction there. Naturalism, it says, all there is natural, like what we can see. It does not deny the existence of supernatural. It just asks the question, how would we test it? How would we know? How do we prove it? So until that there's a demonstration to that effect, naturalism is the only thing we can deal with. In the universe, we observe material.
Okay. Actually, time is up, and time is actually far much spent. I think I will have to ask for an apology from the rest, because actually the comments were so many, and I was trying to listen to your responses as I'm looking at the comments to check which one do I ask, which one do I not ask to be equally asked. So there are many comments, so I'm grateful for everyone who has commented. And I think we've been able to touch on the gist of most of what was being asked in the comments. For those that I have not responded to, maybe we will have another debate to tackle those ones. But now we can maybe finish off with the final statements. And I guess secular Kenyan, you can, so it's only 2 minutes, 2 minutes each. So the idea is to give a summary in 2 minutes of which is the Western ideology, whether the question matters, why not go back to African traditional religion. So in 2 minutes, if you are now to summarize that, secular Kenyan, when you start speaking, I'll put on the timer for 2 minutes.
Okay, now, thank you very much. The question is atheism or Christianity a Western ideology? Atheism is not an ideology. Christian is a Western and colonial ideology. That is my position. Does it matter? It matters not because of the truth, but because of, as I demonstrated, religions carry with them a lot of cultural pride. Every culture, the reason why Hindus are proud is because they look at God, they see a God who looks like them, they think their gods created them first and everybody else secondary. Christians think the same, Muslims think the same. But the problem is when another culture is imposed on you, you cannot be the primary. You become secondary to that culture. And so what has happened is now Africans have been given a culture that is not theirs, and they're being and in that culture, the key characters and the key tenets of that culture are not Africans. It's a white God, or a Jewish God, is a
1
Jewish
minute left.
angels. Everything is foreign to them. So that makes them, and number two, this culture that is being imposed on them, especially the Bible, has a lot of immense things like supporting slavery that they have been victim of. So what that does is, first of all, it reduces your pride, identity, sense of identity, and it's not good for you. So conclusion, should we go back to traditional religions? No. As a matter of culture, we should embrace cultures that are African. But as a matter of religion, we should embrace claims that are backed by evidence. Whether they're Africans or whatever, they should be backed by evidence. Evidence else, we don't know. That should be the default position. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And I just finished before 2 minutes were up. Now we go to Allan. The same issue, 2 minutes to summarize.
All right, 2 minutes is, yeah. So is atheism, is Christianity a Western ideology? I would say no, because of its actual ability to rather than impose, adapt to cultural realities. That is a fact of Christianity that has been demonstrated throughout history. Are there links to colonialism? Absolutely, yes. Has there been imposition of culture? Yes. There needs to be a line drawn between culture and Christianity. Even Christians themselves have historically struggled with that. And that's why we have had the conflation of the two and the colonial relations between culture and Christianity throughout history. There's also evidence to prove that, if anything, Christianity, let me speak about, this is a study done about Protestant conversionary Christianity, evangelicalism, if you'd call it, has actually had positive impacts on democratic outcomes, on better livelihoods. And you can check out Robert Woodbury, who's done an excellent study on that.
1 minute left.
Thank you. Again, as I would like to reiterate, Christianity is more adept for its cultural adaptation rather than imposition. And that's why even in societies where it seems to have been imposed, or it has been imposed, it still thrives because there is something about it that goes beyond the pain. James Cone, an Black American theologian, probably the father of Black theology, was asked, why are you still a Christian when, you know, a white man used Christianity to oppress you and persecute you? And he says, because I cannot look at Jesus and say, you don't know what it means to suffer. So there's something about Christianity that is inherent and fundamental to it that makes it adaptable rather than simply imposed. Going back to African religions, I would say no, because there's no real African religion. It's more of a worldview that includes religious rites and practices. It's a unified, holistic system. So what we can do with that instead is adapt what is acceptable from a Christian perspective and overlay that with the truth claims of Christianity. Is it possible for you to be a good African and a good Christian? Absolutely, yes. I'd encourage you to look for John Karanja on the making of, I can't remember the title of the book, but he writes how this worked out in the Anglican Church in Kikuyu land in the 20th century, and how it became thoroughly Kikuyu in its cultural structure, even while retaining this Christian character and Anglican Western structure. So I believe that it is possible for us to overlay that African culture with that adaptable Christianity without compromising the Christian message and transforming that culture. Thank you.
All right, guys, this has been another African debate session. And today we're discussing the often discussed question on memes on whether Christianity is a white or a Western import, and I guess by extension, naturalism. And so we're discussing how that matters, and like whether African traditional religion is the way to go. And I think much more could be said. And for those whom we didn't get to their questions, sorry, guys, we will try to see how we can maybe get into it in a future, maybe debate or so. But before we go, I just wanted to say, so Allan, Allan is a friend of Apologetics Kenya, who actually are the ones who have given the impetus for such debates to take place. And so like we are grateful he was able to show up. And I wanted to, I guess, share something. I don't know if I'll find it. Let me see. Can I find, just a second, let me see. I think it's a bit hard to show from here, but I don't know, is it showing? Let me see. I think it's not showing for some reason. Okay, I think technology is working against me, but what I wanted to show is that, well, first of all, Apologetics Kenya is an organization that does seek to engage those who are not Christians and also equip those who are Christians on what they believe and why they believe it. And so like there's a website I'm not able to share right now. I think my Zoom has some issues, but if you go to apologeticskenya.org, you'll find information on Apologetics Kenya. And in fact, very soon a conference is going to be taking place, and so you should check out apologeticskenya.org for details soon. And also there are 2 certificate course sessions that have been done this year and last year, just to teach on various issues to deal with the Christian faith and its validity. And so you can check that information also on the website. And we also have a lot of information on the history of Christianity in Africa on the YouTube page of Apologetics Kenya, and also a longer talk by Allan. And also for our friend Secular Kenyan, we also have, actually he has our YouTube page, Secular Kenyan, as well as is part of a group called the Atheist Hangout. Or should I say it's
Skeptics and Atheists in Kenya, yeah?
Yeah, Skeptics and Atheists in Kenya.
South Kenya, Skeptic and Atheist Society of Kenya. Okay,
Skeptics and Atheist Society of Kenya. And so this is kind of slightly different from Atheists in Kenya Society. And so like they also have a YouTube page called the Atheist Hangout. In fact, I wanted to share, but yeah, my Zoom has an issue, but that's okay. So, and so like they also have some other discussions that they've had in the past that you can check them out on. And you can also engage them further there. And for Africa Debates, this has actually been live streamed on YouTube. So you can just go to African Debates on YouTube, and then you can like, subscribe, and share, so that we can get this information out there, so that people can know that they're Africans talking about their issues and seeing how they can think about their past, present, and future, and what it means for them and the African diaspora, because this is not only an issue for Africa, but also the African diaspora. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. I think I haven't left anything out. I think that's the end. So that's the end of the session today. So you can log out as you deem fit. And I guess you can tune in next time for the next session, whatever it will be. Otherwise, have a nice Saturday. For those heading to church tomorrow, have a nice one. For those not, also have a nice one. And I guess we will interact again soon. And that's it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, and thank you everyone watching on YouTube, those on Facebook. Yeah, thanks a lot. You can log out as we deem fit. Oh yeah, and the recording will be